A Clockwork Orange crossed a line no film had ever dared to cross. What once seemed like pure fiction turned into a painful reality. One actor paid an unexpected and heavy price, and the consequences went far beyond the world of cinema. And one of the film's 12 cast members will change the way you see everything. Warren Clarke as Dim, in A Clockwork Orange. Amid the cold precision of control and chaos, one figure stood out not for intelligence, but for something far more unsettling. Warren Clarke's Dim, a man whose laughter could turn from harmless to horrifying in a heartbeat. Large, slow, and seemingly simple-minded Dim was the kind of presence audiences couldn't quite place, until it was too late. He was comic relief, yes, but also a reminder of how easily violence can wear a foolish face. Born Alan James Clarke in the industrial town of Oldham in 1947, he came from a working-class background where life was practical, not performative. Acting wasn't a childhood dream, so much as a path discovered along the way, emerging from the fringes of British television in the late 1960s. There was no overnight breakthrough, only persistence, small roles, and the quiet pressure of proving he belonged in a world that often favored polish over grit. Then came Dim. On set, Clarke reportedly struggled with dyslexia, making scripts harder to process. Yet he leaned into instinct, building a character that felt disturbingly real. His performance wasn't calculated, it was lived, raw, and unpredictable. And that unpredictability became part of what made the Droogs unforgettable. After the film, Clarke didn't fade, he evolved. British audiences would later embrace him as the sharp-witted and abrasive Andy Dalziel in Dalziel and Pascoe, a role that redefined his career and showcased a depth few expected from the man once known as Dim. Off-screen, he built a quiet life, marrying twice and raising two children far removed from the chaos he once portrayed. In 2014, at 67, Warren Clarke passed away after a short illness, leaving behind a legacy shaped not by scandal, but by transformation. And perhaps that's the quiet truth of his story. Sometimes the most underestimated presence is the one that lingers longest in memory. James Marcus as Georgie, in A Clockwork Orange, where chaos wears a mask of control. James Marcus's Georgie emerges as something more dangerous than violence alone. He is ambition without restraint, a quiet challenger waiting for the moment to strike. Among the Droogs, Georgie wasn't the loudest nor the most unpredictable, but he carried a tension that lingered beneath the surface. The subtle threat of betrayal that made every scene feel unstable, as if power could shift at any second. Born Brian Terence James in Romford, Essex in 1942, Marcus grew up in South London, far from the polished world of cinema. Before acting found him, music did. He played rock in his early years, drawn to rhythm and performance long before stepping into scripted roles. That transition from music stages to film sets wasn't seamless. Like many working actors of his time, he navigated uncertainty, minor roles, and the quiet pressure of proving his place in an industry that rarely offered guarantees. On set, Marcus approached Georgie with restraint, choosing calculation over chaos. It's said that his portrayal deliberately held back emotion, creating a contrast with the more explosive characters around him. That decision gave Georgie his edge, the sense that he was always thinking, always watching, waiting for Alex to falter. And when that fracture finally appeared, it felt inevitable. After the film, Marcus built a steady, respected career in British television, most notably as Sidney Tate in London's Burning. He later expanded into writing and directing with Tank Mauling in 1989, revealing a creative voice beyond acting. His life remained largely private, grounded away from the turbulence often associated with fame. James Marcus passed away in 2020 at the age of 77, and yet Georgie remains quiet, watchful, and forever poised on the edge of betrayal, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous force is not the loudest one in the room. And just when you think everything ends on screen, the story of Malcolm McDowell, the man behind that haunting smile, will make you realize the true price of this film. Malcolm McDowell as Alex DeLarge in A Clockwork Orange. Malcolm McDowell didn't just play Alex DeLarge, he became a contradiction that audiences could never quite resolve. Charming, yet monstrous, poetic, yet brutal Alex was the kind of figure you feared, and somehow couldn't look away from. With a bowler hat, a cane, and a love for Beethoven, he turned violence into performance, leaving behind one of the most haunting anti-heroes cinema has ever known. Born Malcolm John Taylor in 1943 in Yorkshire, England, he came from a working-class family, his father running a pub and his mother working in hospitality. There was nothing inevitable about his path to stardom. He studied at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art, chasing something uncertain, something fragile. His early breakthrough came with If, 1968, where his raw intensity caught the attention of Stanley Kubrick, who would soon see in him the perfect vessel for something far more dangerous. What many don't realize is that one of the film's most iconic sequences, the Ludovico treatment, came at a real cost. McDowell's eyes were forcibly held open with metal clamps, causing him physical injury during filming. It was a moment where fiction blurred into reality, where the price of art became painfully literal, after the film fame arrived quickly and heavily. McDowell later admitted that the sudden recognition frightened him, and for a time he was trapped in the shadow of Alex typecast, misunderstood, defined by a role too powerful to escape. But he endured. Over the decades, he rebuilt, appearing in more than 100 films from Oh Lucky Man to The Artist, and even finding new audiences through voice work and television. Now in his 80s, living in Los Angeles, Malcolm McDowell remains active, still drawn to the craft that once overwhelmed him. He never fully left Alex behind, but perhaps that was never the point. Because some characters don't fade, they echo quietly in every role that follows. Patrick Magee as F. Alexander. In A Clockwork Orange, Patrick Magee's F. Alexander is not introduced as a monster, but as a mind refined, articulate, almost fragile. And yet by the time his story unfolds, that same mind becomes something far more unsettling, a man reshaped by trauma, driven not by reason, but by the quiet, consuming force of revenge. It is this transformation that lingers long after the screen fades. Magee was born in 1922 in Armagh, Northern Ireland, far from the polished intellectual he would later portray. His early life carried the weight of conflict, including time as a prisoner of war during World War II, an experience that would leave an imprint on his understanding of control suffering and survival. Before cinema, he built his reputation on stage, eventually collaborating with playwright Samuel Beckett, whose influence sharpened his ability to navigate characters caught between thought and despair. There is a haunting symmetry in Magee's casting. Stanley Kubrick had admired his voice, distinct, almost unsettling, and chose him not just for presence, but for that intangible tension he carried. In one of the film's most disturbing sequences, Magee's performance required him to portray both helplessness and fury, a balance so precise it blurred the line between victim and aggressor. It wasn't spectacle, it was restraint-breaking slowly. After the film, Magee continued working with Kubrick in Barry Lyndon while maintaining a steady presence in theater and film. Off-screen, his life remained grounded, shared with his wife, Belle Sherry, and their children, far removed from the psychological intensity he portrayed. He passed away in 1982 at the age of 60, quietly, without the spectacle that often surrounds fame. And yet his performance endures, not loud, not dominant, but echoing softly as a reminder that sometimes the deepest wounds are the ones that speak the least. Anthony Sharp as the Minister of the Interior. In A Clockwork Orange, power does not shout. It speaks softly with confidence and rarely needs to explain itself. Anthony Sharp's Minister of the Interior embodies that quiet authority, a man who never raises his voice yet shapes the fate of others with chilling ease. He is not violent, not chaotic, and perhaps that is what makes him the most unsettling presence of all. On screen, the minister is composed, pragmatic, and disturbingly rational. He doesn't see Alex as a human being, but as a problem to be solved, a symbol to be controlled for political gain. In a world driven by brutality, his calm acceptance of the Ludovico technique reveals something deeper, the willingness of power to sacrifice morality for order. It is a performance built on restraint, where every word feels measured, every gesture deliberate. Born in London in 1915, Anthony Sharp came from a generation shaped by uncertainty and transformation. His path into acting was steady rather than explosive, built through theater and supporting roles that demanded presence without spectacle. He became known for portraying figures of authority men who carried influence not through force but through position and perception. There was a precision to his work, a quiet discipline that made him a natural fit for the world Stanley Kubrick created. What many overlook is how seamlessly Sharp blended into these roles, particularly in his later collaboration with Kubrick in Barry Lyndon. He was never the center of attention, but always part of the structure holding it together. Off-screen, his life remained largely private, untouched by scandal, grounded in the craft rather than the spotlight. Anthony Sharp passed away in 1984 at the age of 69, and yet his legacy lingers in a different way, not as a character remembered for emotion, but as a presence that reminds us how easily control can appear, calm, reasonable, and unquestioned. Godfrey Quigley as the prison chaplain. In A Clockwork Orange, where control tightens its grip and morality begins to blur, one voice quietly resists. Godfrey Quigley's prison. Chaplin does not shout, does not dominate the screen, yet his presence carries a weight that lingers far beyond his scenes. He is the conscience in a world that has almost forgotten what that means. Within the prison walls, the chaplain stands apart from the machinery of reform. While others see Alex as a subject to be corrected, he sees a soul still capable of choice. His objection to the Ludovico technique is not political, but spiritual, rooted in the belief that goodness forced is no goodness at all. It is a subtle performance built not on intensity, but on conviction, and it reminds the audience of something easily lost in the film's brutality, the fragile idea of free will. Quigley himself was born in Jerusalem in 1923, later raised in Ireland, his life shaped by displacement and quiet resilience. He built his career steadily, appearing in theater and film with a calm, grounded presence that made him a natural fit for roles of authority and reflection. Kubrick would later cast him again in Barry Lyndon, recognizing that same quiet strength. His career continued with roles in films like Get Carter and Educating Rita, never seeking the spotlight, yet always leaving an impression. In 1994, he passed away at the age of 71 after battling Alzheimer's disease, a slow fading that stood in stark contrast to the clarity he once brought to his roles. And perhaps that is what remains his voice, gentle but unwavering, reminding us that even in a world of control, the question of choice never truly disappears. Carl Duering as Dr. Brodsky. In A Clockwork Orange, where violence is obvious and chaos is loud, Carl Duering's Dr. Brodsky operates in a quieter, more unsettling space, the place where cruelty becomes clinical and control is dressed as progress. He does not rage, does not threaten. Instead, he observes, measures, and proceeds as if morality were just another variable to be managed. On screen, Dr. Brodsky is composed, intellectual, almost detached. He believes in the Ludovico technique not as an act of cruelty, but as a solution, a way to reshape human behavior through science. That calm certainty is what makes him so disturbing. While others commit violence with emotion, Brodsky removes emotion entirely. In doing so, he becomes a symbol of something deeper, the danger of intelligence without empathy. Carl Duering himself was born in Berlin in 1923, his early life shaped by a Europe in turmoil. Eventually relocating to Britain, he rebuilt his life and career in a new language, a new culture, carrying with him the quiet resilience of someone who had already seen the world fracture once before. Acting became his way of grounding that experience, often taking on roles that required authority, precision, and restraint. After the film, Duering continued working steadily in British cinema and television, including appearances in The Boys from Brazil. He was never a headline name, but always a reliable presence, the kind of actor who gave structure to the worlds around him. He passed away in 2018 at the age of 95, leaving behind a legacy not of spectacle, but of control. And perhaps that is what endures his reminder that sometimes the most dangerous hands are the ones that never appear to tremble. Miriam Karlin as the Cat Lady. In A Clockwork Orange, violence is everywhere, but one moment stands apart, sudden and unforgettable. Miriam Karlin's Cat Lady appears briefly, yet her presence leaves a mark that lingers far longer than her screen time, turning a single scene into one of the most disturbing images in cinematic history. On screen, she is eccentric, defensive, and fiercely independent, surrounded by her beloved cats and a world she controls. There is something almost tragic beneath her sharpness, a woman clinging to order in a society that feels increasingly unstable. When that fragile control is shattered, the shock is not just in the act itself, but in how quickly normalcy collapses into brutality. It is a scene that audiences remember not because of spectacle, but because of how real it feels in its chaos. Miriam Karlin was born in London in 1925 into a Jewish family shaped by displacement and resilience. Before film, she built her name in British theatre and television, most notably in the rag trade, where her sharp wit and distinctive presence made her a household name. Acting for her was never about glamour. It was about truth often delivered with edge and conviction. Behind the scenes, Karlin was deeply political, an outspoken left-wing activist who believed strongly in social justice, a contrast to the vulnerability she portrayed on screen. She never married, choosing instead a life defined by independence and purpose. Awarded an OBE in 1975, she remained active for decades before passing away in 2011 at the age of 85 after battling cancer. And yet in that one brief role, she became part of something larger, a moment that reminds us how fragile control can be and how quickly it can disappear. Stay with Legends of Classic Hollywood. Comment your thoughts, keep watching, and uncover the next story that changes everything forever right now. Michael Bates as Chief Guard Barnes. In A Clockwork Orange, cruelty is not always chaotic. Sometimes it is disciplined, structured, and routine. Michael Bates's Chief Guard Barnes embodies that cold efficiency, a man who does not question the system he enforces, but becomes an extension of it. His presence is firm, unyielding, and quietly intimidating, the kind of authority that feels impossible to escape. On screen, Barnes is harsh, commanding, and stripped of empathy. He doesn't need to raise his voice often. His control lies in certainty, in the rigid belief that order must be maintained at any cost. Through him, the prison becomes more than a setting. It becomes a machine, one that grinds individuality into submission. And yet there is something disturbingly familiar in his demeanor, a reminder that such figures exist not in extremes, but in everyday structures of power. Michael Bates was born in 1920 in Jhansi, then part of British India, a background shaped by empire and transition. Before acting, he served in the British Army during World War II, an experience that likely influenced the disciplined authority he later portrayed. His journey into acting was gradual, built through theater and television, where he developed a reputation for strong, character-driven roles. Behind the stern exterior, Bates was also known for comedy, particularly in It Ain't Half Hot Mum and Last of the Summer Wine, revealing a versatility that contrasted sharply with his on-screen severity. He passed away in 1978 at the age of 57, and perhaps that contrast is what lingers most, a man who could make audiences laugh, yet remain forever remembered as a symbol of control that never once smiled. Aubrey Morris as P.R. Deltoid. In A Clockwork Orange, before the state imposes control, there is one man who still believes in guidance. Aubrey Morris's P.R. Deltoid stands at that fragile boundary, part mentor, part observer, trying in his own limited way to steer Alex away from the darkness already taking hold. On screen, Deltoid is uneasy, almost fragile in authority. His voice carries urgency, even frustration, as if he knows he's already too late. There is something deeply human in his failure, not because he lacks effort, but because he is confronting something beyond simple correction. In a story filled with extremes, Deltoid represents the quiet, often overlooked attempt to intervene before everything collapses. Born in Portsmouth in 1926, Aubrey Morris built his career through theater and character roles, often embracing figures that felt slightly off-center, subtly eccentric. That distinct presence became his strength. A lesser-known detail is how his expressive vocal style, sometimes theatrical, sometimes unsettling, was something he refined deliberately, turning what could have been a limitation into a signature. After the film, Morris continued appearing in memorable works like The Wicker Man and Love and Death, always leaving a unique imprint. He passed away in 2015 at 89, and perhaps Deltoid's quiet struggle still echoes the reminder that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we never had the power to win. Adrienne Corri as Mrs. Alexander. In A Clockwork Orange, there is a moment so unsettling that it refuses to fade no matter how many years pass. At the center of it stands Adrienne Corri, whose portrayal of Mrs. Alexander is not defined by lines or screen time, but by the emotional weight she was willing to carry when others could not. On screen, she appears warm, ordinary part of a quiet, domestic world that feels safe, almost comforting. And then, in an instant, that safety is shattered. The scene is infamous not for spectacle, but for its raw intensity, and Corri's performance anchors it in something deeply human. It is vulnerability without exaggeration, fear without artifice, and that truth is what makes it so difficult to watch and impossible to forget. Born in Glasgow in 1931, Corri built a career across film and theater, including roles in Dr. Zhivago. Few realize she was not the first choice for this role. 2 actresses had stepped away before her. She accepted, fully aware of the emotional demands, approaching it with professionalism and resolve. Beyond the film, she lived a quieter life, raising 2 children after her marriage to Daniel Massey ended. She passed away in 2016 at 84. And yet her brief moment on screen endures a reminder that sometimes the most powerful performances are the ones that ask the most and leave something behind. Michael Tarn as Pete. In A Clockwork Orange, where violence defines identity and chaos becomes routine, one figure quietly steps back. Michael Tarn's Pete is not the loudest, not the cruelest, and perhaps that is precisely what makes him different. While the others spiral deeper into brutality, Pete becomes something rare in that world, someone who chooses to leave. On screen, he is restrained, observant, almost distant from the madness surrounding him. There is a subtle hesitation in his presence, a sense that he does not fully belong to the violence he participates in. And when he reappears later, changed, composed, living a more ordinary life, he becomes a quiet contrast to Alex, a suggestion that transformation does not always require force. Born in London in the early 1950s, Tarn entered the film at just 17 with little experience and no long-standing career behind him. Unlike many young actors chasing recognition, he did not remain in the spotlight for long. After a few minor roles, he stepped away from acting, almost entirely choosing a life outside the industry. Today, he lives privately, rarely appearing in public, known quietly as the last surviving member of the original Droogs. And perhaps that is his story's quiet power, not the one who stayed, not the one who fell, but the one who simply walked away. For A Clockwork Orange. What began as a story about control and violence slowly became something far more human. Some of them are gone now, quietly fading into history, while others carried the weight of those roles for decades, shaped by a film that refused to let them go. Behind the stylized chaos were real lives marked by endurance, reinvention, and sometimes silence. Because in the end, this wasn't just about a film. It was about what happens when art blurs into reality and the cost of being remembered for something the world can't forget. And maybe the most unsettling truth is this: the characters were forced to change. But the people who played them never fully could. So tell me whose story stayed with you the longest. And when you think back to that cold, unblinking stare, Was Alex ever truly cured or just rewritten?